Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined once again by Post-Gazette sports columnist Paul Zeise for our weekly Zeise is Right video. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm ready to talk about a big week for the Steelers. I think it really feels like there's a lot of angst that is going to be resolved one way or the other with this Ravens game. If they lose this game, I think there's going to be some real fury around town. And if they win, maybe that blunts some of what we've seen in the past week. But I think there's a lot of interesting conversation here, Paul. We're going to talk about Art Rooney's role in where the Steelers are right now. There's been a lot of talk, especially on this channel over the past week, about Mike Tomlin, Matt Canada, but Art Rooney's a key player in this as well. Maybe a little bit of Omar Khan talk as well and where he fits into this mix. Before we do that, just a reminder, this show is brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get windows installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Paul, I really want to get into this conversation about Art Rooney II and his role in where the Steelers are. I'm going to start this with the offense because we know he was pretty involved in the decision to hold on to Matt Canada. Some of it was philosophical and the Steelers' belief in honoring contracts. Some of it was a matter of trying to capture the momentum that they built in the second half last season and seeing if it could translate into this early season. Now that it hasn't, Paul, where do you assign the level of blame for the owner who has involved himself in decisions that someone of his rank in the organization probably shouldn't always be involved in? But he has made it clear that he's taken ownership of some of these decisions. And if we're going to talk about Mike Tomlin as much as we do, should we also be talking about Art Rooney and the way he's done business?
Well, Art Rooney and Mike Tomlin are tied together, aren't they? I mean, at the end of the day, there's only one guy in that organization that could fire Mike Tomlin. And it's not Omar Khan. It's not Andy Weidel. It's not, what's the Rooney that is actually like rising in the organization? I think it's Dan's son maybe or something who's rising. There's only one guy, and that's Art Rooney II, who has the power and authority to hire Mike Tomlin. Fire Mike Tomlin and hire another coach. So absolutely. And here's the thing, the buck for all of these decisions, even if Art Rooney isn't involved, the buck stops with him. There's no question about it. I feel like his brother, Dan, or I guess it's his brother, right, Dan? Or is that his dad? It's his brother. I think it's Dan. Is he young? Art's younger brother, or is he Dan's younger brother, Adam?
He's Dan's son.
It's his son. Okay, yeah. You're right. So it'd be his father.
Art Rooney Jr. Art Rooney
Right.
Jr. is Dan's brother. Yes. It's confusing because there's the second and there's Junior.
Right. So
they're the end of the day, they're different people.
Right. So at the end of the day, one of the things that people said about Dan Rooney is he really got football. He was a football guy. That basically Art Rooney Sr., the chief, right? The cigar smoking chief, was really clueless when it came to football. And then it showed in 40 years of just awful football. It wasn't until he turned it over to Dan that the Steelers became the Steelers. And obviously Dan made some moves like, hiring Bill Nunn and hiring Chuck Noll and things of the such. But to be honest, one of the criticisms was Art II is he's far more lawyer than he is football guy. And to me, that's not a valid excuse for being asleep at the switch or allowing some things to go on, maybe because you want to, I'm going to let my football people handle it. No. If your name is on it, which his name is on it, right, you're responsible for everything that it goes on. And in my mind, he's probably not stepped in enough when it comes to hiring and firing assistant coaches. He probably hasn't stepped in enough when it comes to certain personnel decisions and certain decisions with certain players. And I think that, to be honest, he should. Not that you want to become Jerry Jones, and appoint yourself the general manager, but at the end of the day, it's your product with your name on it. So we're circling all the way back to Mike Tomlin. If I'm Art Rooney II, I'm having some very, very frank discussions with Mike Tomlin about some of his staff, about Matt Canada, about the offense, about the picks that we've invested in the players that aren't playing. There'd be a number of subjects that I'd be willing to sit down that I think Art Rooney II should sit down. But at the end of the day, he doesn't seem to. And so to answer the overall thesis or whatever, the question, absolutely, he deserves as much blame as anybody in that, or actually more blame than anybody in that organization for what's going on, because he is the one who has the power to make changes.
Yeah, Paul, I think part of the question I have too is whether Art Rooney believes that the thing that's made the Steelers great through all these years are decisions that have been made in the boardroom not to fire coaches, and then that has become a thing, from a different time where there were different, factors at play, that because, this is his team, his family's asset, that he believes that identity of what the decisions they make not to fire coaches is somehow what has made the Steelers great, and not the people that they've had in the locker room and in the coaching offices. Do you think that that's part of the issue here too? Is that maybe he hasn't been as involved in it as he should be, in part because he thinks that's just the way the Steelers should do business, and that's what's made them great, instead of you've had good employees and you trusted them to get the job done, and not that you trusted them regardless of results.
No, I mean, the thing about it is, yeah, they've had good employees, they've hired good people, but that doesn't mean that you can't change the way you do business when it's clearly not working. And the other part of it is, I think one of the biggest problems, Adam, that the Steelers have is that the organization as a whole, from top to bottom, is a little bit stale, because they've had the same people forever, doing the same things forever. And, it's nice that they moved Omar Khan around, and Andy Weidel in, and, they've made some movements like that. But for the most part, I think, the 3 coaches since 69 is a nice badge of honor. But is it really doing your best to make sure that your organization is at its best? And so to me, if the only thing you can come up with is that, well, Mike Tomlin has done a pretty good job year after year, he's never had a losing season, that tells me that you're really not interested in getting back to the top and being the best as an organization that you can be. Because at the end of the day, organizations that tend to have success have stability, but they also aren't afraid to make really tough decisions or really unpopular decisions, and make some moves that maybe don't on the surface seem like they're really all that fair, but they're what was needed. And I think that's what the Steelers lack more than anything else, is they're so interested in the Steelers' way and stability that sometimes I think they miss the big picture, which is the stability is also holding you back as much as it's allowing you to compete, And to me, I'm not interested, Adam, in another year where they bounce around 500, right? And they're slopping together enough wins that are ugly, and they get to the end of the year and they win their last game and they're 9-8. So it's another non-losing season, even if they're a wild card. If they go on and they lose in the playoff, to me, here's what I would ask Steeler fans: is this good enough for you? Because it seems to be good enough for Art Rooney and company, right? Is it good enough for you if they go 9-8 again? And so they're the 7th seed, okay, and they draw, let's say, Buffalo, and they lose by 24 points, to the Bills in a playoff game like they did a few years ago with Kansas City. Is that good enough? I don't think it is. And so the product of stability is, well, our team every year we have a chance to get to the playoffs because every year, we aren't changing things up, and we have a formula that gives us an opportunity to win some games in the regular season. My argument is, you know what the other thing about your formula for stability has done? It's basically put a cap. It's basically put a cap on probably your ceiling. So what, to me, I look at, for instance, the Rams. Would you rather be the Rams who went all in and won a Super Bowl? And, they had a little bit of a rough year last year, whatever. Okay, Sean McVay can't say I've never had a losing season, but he's won a Super Bowl within the last few years. You know what I'm saying? It's the way it goes. Same thing with the Eagles. The Eagles have had 15 coaches, it seems like, in the last 10 years, right? And guess what? They've been to a Super Bowl. They won a Super Bowl. They've been to another Super Bowl. Yeah, they've had a couple of ugly years, but they give themselves a chance when they're willing to make tough and hard decisions and to say, you know what, we're not going to settle for just this is sort of where we are and this is where we've always been.
Yeah, I think you're using the word stability, Paul. I think there's a parochial vibe coming off of this team when you really put it all together. I think any of these one decisions you can justify in a vacuum, but when you start to look at all of the decisions together, it starts to feel like this team, there's like some patronage going on here. Like you've had the same coach for almost 20 years. I got my list here. I'm going to read it off. The offensive coordinator is a Pitt guy. The quarterback is a Pitt guy. There have been like 8 sets of brothers on this team. Mike Tomlin's been able to pick like how many kids from Maryland where his son played. They invested a premium draft pick in the son of a former assistant coach who, and Joey Porter, who was also on the team for a long time and is very close to Mike Tomlin. Take those all together, Paul, and doesn't it make you question, are these the best coaches and the best 53-man roster you can put together? Or is there emotion and provincialism getting involved in some of these decisions and clouding what should be emotionless decisions like you were leading into before?
The general manager was a long time assistant general manager, right? The assistant general manager grew up in Mount Lebanon and was a scout for the Steelers, and his family has all kinds of ties to the Rooneys, right, and whatnot. You have there were a couple of others that you were actually. Terrell Austin is a Pitt guy who's from Sharon, too, right? I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. And I'm not saying that there's always something wrong with that, but as I always used to say, right, and I'm going to take this down a little bit to the Pitt, because it's the same thing, Adam. Because when I covered Pitt for like almost 20 years, I covered Pitt. I would almost annually have these kinds of arguments with Pitt fans, right? Who would always insist when there was an opening that they had to hire a Pitt guy. Got to have a Pitt guy, right? Got to have a Pitt guy that understands us. And I would always say this. Of all of the coaches of men's basketball and football over the last 25 years, who is by far the most successful coach they ever hired? Ben Howland, who they hired from Northern California or wherever the hell he was, Northern Arizona, right? And it was a kid from California. And, 4 years later when he left, obviously they promoted Jamie Dixon, so you could say that was provincial. But Dixon came with Howland. Dixon played at TCU. Dixon was a West Coast guy for his entire life, right? He was at Pitt, but he wasn't hired because of his ties to Pitt or whatever. He was hired because he basically impressed the athletic director that, hey, this guy, really knows what he's doing. My point is, you don't have to always have provincialism when you hire people. And it doesn't always have to be a factor. And it shouldn't always be a factor. I've always said provincialism should be you can check that box if there's, 30 things that are the same with these two candidates, right? And one checks that box and the other doesn't. Okay, maybe you just say that's the tiebreaker. But it shouldn't be the first item on your resume. It never should have been, never should be the first item on your resume is that, hey, I played here, or I'm from here, or whatever, Great example of college football right now. Does Deion Sanders have any ties to the Colorado or University of Colorado, right? I mean, they were all talking about, we should hire, a couple of McCartney assistants or a couple of, what I'm saying? Guys that had Colorado ties. They went completely out of the box, and it's working out for them. When you do that, you limit your pool of people that you can actually go and hire, and like I said, I think, Andy Weidel is very smart. He's bright. I'm glad he went out and worked for some other organizations. He seems like he's a really good hire. right? But he's a provincial hire in many ways because I think, his family had some ties to Tom Donahoe or whatever, but, he's a Mount Lebanon kid. Omar Khan was an assistant for 20 some years or whatever. Who else did they interview? Doug Whaley, who was once a Steelers GM or scout or assistant GM who went to Pitt, right? And Louis Riddick, who went to Pitt. You know what I'm saying? And my point is, we could do that all day, but that is all a part of the problem, Adam, is that mentality the Steelers have. It's their best friend in some ways because, every single year you have stability, and it seems like every single year you're able to slop your way to 8 or 9 wins, and you never go to the 3-13. But I think the Eagles had a 3-13, didn't they? Like a couple of years ago, I think they had a 3-13, right?
They were really bad.
They fired the coach who won a Super Bowl, right? Because he had bottomed out. And they hired this other guy, and they were in the Super Bowl last year. And, basically they'd have won the thing if it wasn't for a superhuman effort by Patrick Mahomes. My point is, I don't believe that just because you do it the same way every single year forever, that necessarily means that you're going to have success at a high level. It means you might have what the Steelers have considered success, which to me ain't good enough.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not trying to bag on Pitt as, a place to produce a lot of great football players, a lot of great football coaches. And, I'm not saying any one decision is wrong. I'm not saying the decision to pick Kenny Pickett's wrong. I'm not saying the decision, to hire and fire different people is wrong. I'm just saying if you add them up and you list off all of the ties and you said, let's look at this as one thing instead of a bunch of separate different decisions, you see a very parochial vibe. And I just think that can only land at Art Rooney's feet. And it very much speaks to how it seems like he wants to run the place, which is, very much rooted in Pittsburgh and maybe doesn't look at the rest of the NFL and all of the things that are happening, all the people who are having success and all of the opportunities you might have to go out and get people. And so I put blame for where the situation is just on that. And just that, to your point, there's reason for fans to believe you've limited your pool of people that you are going after or are interested in, or give yourself the chance to bring in to freshen things up. And that's, we can blame Mike Tomlin for X, Y, or Z, but I think that mentality starts at the top.
The funniest thing about it, though, is, do you know who the one guy they went out of the box and way against all of the provincialism to hire?
Was Mike Tomlin.
Mike Tomlin. If you remember, the other candidates were what? Russ Grimm, right? And Ken Wisenhunt. Russ Grimm from Southmoreland, I think he's a Pitt guy, isn't he? I think he's a Pitt guy too, isn't he? And he's from Southmoreland, had some ties to the Steelers and was working with the Steelers. I mean, it's funny, but the guy that worked out really well, at least initially for the first 5 or 6 years, was a guy they went out and had nobody had ever even heard of the guy. Like, I always tell people this all the time when they tell me, oh, well, if you fire Mike Tomlin, you tell me one coach that's better. Who's going to come in? You're not going to get Bill Belichick to come in. And this is what I always say. The greatest argument for firing Mike Tomlin is Mike Tomlin. Because at the end of the day, when Bill Cowher retired, Adam, and I don't care if you're the greatest Steeler diehard on the planet, if I said, write down a list of 50 names right now that you would like to see the Steelers hire to be head coach, Mike Tomlin, if you gave 1,000 fans that list, I don't know that Mike Tomlin's name would have showed up on a single list, right? Maybe because if you get to 50, you start, scraping, but not one of them would have had Tomlin in his top 20, right? Never even heard of the guy. So my point is, my answer is, yeah, you're right. You're not going to get Andy Reid or, Pete Carroll or Bill Belichick, but guess what? You might be able to get the next Mike Tomlin, right? The hotshot young assistant that nobody really even knows that much about if you go out and do your research and you're willing to be open-minded about it. So it's why that whole thing, you can't fire Mike Tomlin because, who are you going to get to hire him that's better? It's BS to me, because to me, the answer is always, how about a young Mike Tomlin?
Yeah, I think that's all fair, and I think it's bigger than Tomlin too. Just to that point of you could fire Mike Tomlin, but if you don't change that mentality of we got to get all these guys who have ties to this organization and ties to the city in here, then it doesn't matter whether it's Mike Tomlin or anyone else. I don't think that that's a recipe for success. Paul, I think we've beaten that topic to death, though. I want to get a couple more Steelers topics out of the way before we get into some Pitt and Pirates talk. You before we got on here, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about Omar Khan's role in changing the Steelers' way. What do you think how he fits into that conversation that we were just having in terms of trying to leave some of the practices in the past, maybe broadening out the Steelers' prospects a little bit, but also keeping some of the identity of the organization intact?
Well, I think it's pretty clear he was a lot more aggressive this offseason than they had been in the past. Made some trades, went out and got free agents. I thought they were aggressive in the draft. And it feels to me like he wants to modernize the Steelers. It feels to me like if you listen to what he has to say and things of the such, I think he wants to bring some of the newer ideas in the NFL into the Steelers organization. But again, to me, the big test will be if they go 9-8 or 8-9, God forbid, and don't win a playoff game. Does he have the stones and the foresight to walk down the hallway and make the case to Art Rooney that it's time to move on from Mike Tomlin? Because that would actually be a huge step away from the Steeler way of doing things, right? Now, one of the things that's a little bit overrated, they never fire coaches. No, they never fire coaches, but they told Chuck Noll it was time to retire. No, they never fire coaches, but they would not give in to all of Bill Cowher's contract demands and some of the things that he was asking for, which is why he stepped down. So, yeah, they didn't fire either of those guys, but I don't know that they made it either, real easy for either one of them to stay around either. And that should be said. So I'm just saying, to me, I think Omar Khan is trying to bring the Steelers into the 21st century and the way of doing things. But the test is still going to be, will you be the guy who's not afraid to fire a coach if they go now 7 years without a playoff win? 7 years without a playoff win, other than the Bengals, you probably cannot find a team that kept the guy intact 7 years that did not at least win one playoff game.
Paul, a couple quick hit topics on the Steelers here. Matt Canada on Sunday or leading up to last Sunday apparently told the CBS broadcast crew that the Steelers offense is not built to play from behind. And that has fired up a lot of people around town. I wanted to get your reaction here on the show. I don't know how you build an offense that can't come from behind, especially in today's NFL. Certainly not one that is going to win at a big level. I mean, again, it goes back to this 9-8 mentality of, can you win some games by playing that way? And you and I have talked about this on, our Sunday show and on this show of, maybe you can beat the Raiders playing that way. You get a lead, you don't give it up. But can you be a really good team if you can't play from behind?
No, you can't. Listen, that's my contention always about the Ravens and why they'll never win the Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson, because they're not a team that can play from behind either. That's the biggest problem. When you have a team that has to have everything go right, when things don't go right for you, then what? Then what happens? And we've seen it. You know what? Even as great as Ben Roethlisberger was in terms of all his fourth quarter comebacks, if you look at his last few years, most of his fourth quarter comebacks where they were down 3, in a sloppy, ugly game. That's not coming from behind, or they're down 6, or whatever. That's not coming from behind. Coming from behind is we are down, 17 with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. And now we can come from behind because we've got a quick strike offense. We got one that can make big plays. That's not this offense, but Adam, is that the offense or is that the personnel? That's the question. I think I understand why Matt Canada, and to me, he's got to go. I understand why people are down on him. I understand why this quote wasn't exactly something that endeared himself to Steeler fans. But at the end of the day, a part of the Steelers' problems on offense a part of it is that their personnel is not good enough. And we've said this. I've said this. I took a lot of heat for saying this about their receivers, right? They just don't scare you. They don't. George Pickens can scare you a little bit here and there, but for the most part, their receivers don't scare you. Their running backs don't scare you. And right now, their quarterback doesn't scare you. So to me, yes, they're not built to come. I would agree with them. You're not built to come from behind. But it's not just because your system sucks, because it does suck. But it's also because the players that you have trying to run that system aren't quite good enough. And until we add that into the discussion, we could bring in Bill Walsh in his prime here. And I don't think it would change a whole lot about this offense, because you need players, right? You need guys that make plays. You need playmakers. I just don't think the Steelers have enough of them.
Yeah, and I think, part of the problem is that is the scheme, is the offense getting the absolute most out of those players? I'd agree, probably not. But how much is there to get out of those players, and how much of it has been hype? How much of it we've been talking ourselves into Calvin Austin just because he's fast? Or is he going to be Jerry Rice all of a sudden? There's definitely an echo chamber in Pittsburgh that I think changes perceptions of players once they show up here, and you have 6 months of an offseason to talk yourself into a guy, and you do. And then when he's not, when every player doesn't look like a Pro Bowler out there, people get disappointed. And I think that's part of the issue too, is I think some of those guys have been thought to be better than they are. So then people are disappointed when they don't perform that well. But you know what I mean? It's a vicious cycle. So Paul, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the defense too, kind of through the same lens of, how many players does the offense really have? But, they've invested a lot in this defense, and, a couple of weeks now against San Francisco, against Houston, they haven't really performed like the, elite defense that they're supposed to be. I know you and I talked on Sunday after the game, you're going to have to win games in the 30s sometimes. Sometimes even the best defenses are going to be had like that, but this is twice in 4 games. If you keep that rate going through the whole season, that's not what the Steelers are paying $100+ million in payroll for.
No, and you know what? They're not very good at stopping the run. And in some ways, their performance against Cleveland was masked a little bit because Cleveland had some issues with their tackles, number one, and turned the ball over a zillion times. But even Cleveland's offense moved the ball against the Steelers. They ran the ball reasonably well, even after Chubb got hurt. Everybody is focused on how bad the offense is, but it was the defense that was supposed to be elite. The defense is good, but it's not elite. And I know that Cam Hayward's hurt, but I got to be honest with you, I don't know that that's really what's holding this defense back. I got to question some of the personnel moves they've made, and we've talked about this a bunch of times with Joey Porter. He can't be worse than Levi Brown and Patrick Peterson. He can't. It's impossible. He can't be worse than those two guys. And he's a guy with upside. So give him a shot. Give him the opportunity. Give him a shot. I mean, I that's one right there. The inside linebackers seem like they've been fine, but I don't know they've been difference makers. You know what? Watt and Highsmith, I guess they decided to take last week off because they did nothing. And if those two do nothing, this defense is very pedestrian, as we found out. So there's some issues on that side of the ball too. I think Mike Tomlin that's his baby. But we go back to, and it's funny, if you listen to the national guys talk, Adam, the national guys all want to give Mike Tomlin a pass, right? They're all attacking Matt Canada. They're not talking about the defense, which is run by Mike Tomlin, or the fact that Mike Tomlin is now, facing the real possibility of going a 7th season without having a playoff win. But it's funny, they don't want to talk about the defense because the defense is Tomlin's baby. But the defense has been as bad as the offense has been in most of these games.
I want to apologize. I got some landscapers outside. It's a little loud if you guys can hear it on the microphone. But Paul, the Joey Porter thing I think is really interesting because I feel like every time I sit down and watch a primetime game now, someone that we were talking about as an option for the Steelers in the NFL draft is making an impact play. Christian Gonzalez for the Patriots. I've seen Brian Branch, I swear, like every other play when I watch the Lions. The other night it was Devin Witherspoon returning an interception for a touchdown in that Monday night game. Is Joey Porter possibly just not that good, or is this a philosophical thing? It's the more you see these guys that he was considered in league with going into this draft succeed, I think the more questions need to be asked about why he's not in there, unless you've just missed on the evaluation.
I just think it's a philosophical thing. Mike Tomlin feels better with veterans in there. It's just how he has always been. But to me, again, to get out of that whole Steeler way thing, the difference between all those guys that you're talking about, Porter, is that those guys are on the field. You can't make plays if you're not on the field. And to me, you're a young guy with a lot of potential that was drafted essentially as a first rounder, even though you're technically a second rounder, right? Why are you not on the field? It's one thing if Patrick Peterson was playing like Patrick Peterson of old. It's one thing if Levi Wallace was playing, at a reasonably high level. They're not. So do you want to keep putting them out there because they're veterans and, well, they're the lesser of two evils? Or do you want to roll the dice and put a rookie out there a couple of weeks and just see what happens? If he doesn't work out, you can always go back to one of the veterans. But the only way he gets better, the only way he proves that he belongs is if he gets an opportunity to play. So it's mind-boggling to me how he's not on the field. Broderick Jones, to me, again, is the same situation. But at least in his case, you can say Dan Moore has been okay. Not great, but okay. But Levi Wallace and Patrick Peterson have not been good. There's no reason why Joey Porter shouldn't be playing.
I'm not with you on the Dan Moore has been okay either, Paul. I think he should, after the first couple of weeks, that should have been it for him. And now it looks like it might be through injury, but, I wonder.
And I'll add this, Adam. I'll add this. If Broderick Jones is just average, he should be the guy for the rest of the year.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I think, he should have been the guy after those first couple of weeks. And I'm curious. I now in hindsight, I'm going to be curious to see how far they would have stuck with Dan Moore before going to Broderick Jones, because I think that would increasingly have become a flashpoint. Paul, we're going to get a couple quick Pirates and Pitt topics here on the other side of this break. Just want to thank a couple more sponsors, Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Also, thank you to Propel Schools. Propel's 13 public charter schools in Allegheny County build a solid academic foundation for lifelong learning and offer more personalized instruction at every level during your child's kindergarten through 12th grade education journey. Give your children the quality education they deserve. Learn more and apply at Propel Schools by visiting propelschools.org. Paul, I want to get into the Pirates here for a second. Jason Mackey has started to do his post-mortem articles on postgazette.com, kind of started to map out the offseason now that they have wrapped up the 2023 campaign. You and I talked about, what we should take from it last week. I want to just get a first reaction to you on some of the moves. He thinks Carlos Santana, the guy who they signed last offseason, who was a member of a pretty bad Pirates team up until he was traded, is the answer at first base moving forward as well. What do you think of Carlos Santana, and what are some of the moves you want to see from this team beyond first base between now and spring training?
So we're going to bring Carlos Santana back. If the team is 4 or 5 games out of first or worse, at the trade deadline, we're going to trade him again. Is that the plan? I mean, come on. What are we talking about here? I think Carlos Santana did what he had to do and survived. He served his role well. But they should be looking for an actual first base option that's going to be here for the next few years. Because that's the one position where they just don't have an answer, and they don't have somebody really. I've heard about this kid in AAA and all this stuff. They legitimately probably don't have the answer in-house. So they need a first baseman, period. And they need to go out and make it somebody that's not a journeyman like Carlos Santana, who is going to be 1 year older next year, by the way, even though he's a good defensive player or whatever. First base, obviously. They need another outfielder, Adam. I'm really convinced of that. And they need at least one legitimate starting pitching option. Bullpen guys you can find. I don't worry that much about the bullpen. but they need at least one more legitimate starting pitching option. But again, all of it hinges on does Rosie Contreras, does Ortiz, does and I think they just actually DFA'd him, but Ortiz or Oviedo or Priester, all these guys, three of them have to pan out. You got Mitch Keller. You hope three of those, that whole jumbled talk. When we talk about all those guys, but you need at least one more option. So you have Keller, that guy, and then hopefully Paul Skeens fixed into the mix, and then you can, the fourth and fifth starter you can fill in. But to me, those are the things that they need the most: a pitcher, an outfielder, and a first baseman. The other thing is they need to figure out what they're going to do with Henry Davis. I mean, if the guy can't play a position, I would trade him this offseason. While he still has some value, I would trade him. Even though he's your first pick, we see teams that win, they're not afraid to admit mistakes, right? They're not afraid to admit mistakes. To me, if they're going to try and bang their head against the wall for the next 2.5, 3 years, trying to figure out what position this guy plays, they should trade him now while he still has some value, right? Move on from him or figure out who he's going to be and what he's going to be. Those are the major ones. They've got to figure out second base, but they've got 5, 6 good options there. You hope that Cruz gets healthy at short, and obviously Brian Hayes continues what he did, although I saw that they fired the coach that he gives the credit for his turnaround at the plate. They fired that guy for helping him out, I guess. It worked out too well. I don't even know what that's all about.
Yeah, I don't know, Paul. I just know that it doesn't really matter to me who they sign this offseason. I don't think that that's going to make or break next year's team. It's going to be, can you have some of these young guys having the OPS in the 7s? Can you have some of your homegrown pitchers having ERA in the 3s? To me, that's the baseline of you did a good job with drafting and development over the last 5 years when you've been lecturing Pirates fans about why they should be happy to watch their team lose, spend no money, be terrible. It's because you've told everyone you're great at drafting and development. And we are at the end of year 4. And if you look up and down that lineup, if you look on, that the Pirates stats on ESPN and you strip away, this guy had a hot week, this guy had a hot week, and just look at the numbers, Paul. There's very few guys who are homegrown guys who came from AAA who have OPSs at 7 or higher, 700 or higher, and ERAs in the 3s. And I think that's a reasonable baseline expectation when you're talking about impact. And that's what you want from the drafting and development. Yeah. I don't think it matters who they sign in the offseason if that doesn't turn around and doesn't turn around in a big way. They don't have to hit on every guy, but they got to have more than like Jared Triolo with a 790 OPS to hang their hat on for the development you've put in for all these years. Or they're stuck, and we're heading toward. I've said this a million times. I'll keep saying it. I feel like last year was 2003. I think that the ceiling for this franchise is rather low until I'm proven otherwise, and I really wasn't proven otherwise this year, which is why I remain pretty suspect about this team. Paul, I want to get into Pitt as well. Cignetti, the offensive coordinator, has been in the crosshairs of Pitt fans this week. People are tweeting out how long his resume was, and questioning whether he, belongs at Pitt in the future. What is your evaluation of where things need to go now that you've lost to a Virginia Tech team that I think you and I both said last week was, if you lose to this team, they're done. Stick a fork in them. There's not a whole lot left. They could still, who knows, Paul? They could pull a 13-9. They could pull an upset in Miami. They could win one of those big games and maybe surprise someone. But in the chances of them having a season that anyone feels good about, I think, are pretty much over.
Well, they already have 4 losses, right?
Yes.
And they still play Notre Dame. They still play Florida State. That likely gets you to 6, which means you have to basically hit the inside straight and win Wake Forest, Louisville, Boston College, Duke, and there's one other game I'm missing. You have to win every one of those other games just to get to 6-6. That doesn't seem like it's realistic. I mean, this looks like the ceiling for this team is 5-7. I will say this. I think Frank is a good football coach. I think he's a pretty good offensive coordinator at times. I think he's had a horrific year. I don't think he's done a very good job with his offense at all. I don't think he's done a very good job of being realistic when it comes to his quarterback. To me, I probably would have made a move at quarterback, or at least opened it up a lot sooner than they have. The fact that if you watch the quarterback play, I don't know, and he's Frank's handpicked guy. I mean, he's got it. Frank actually helped develop at Boston College, by the way. I don't know that he's been good enough either. I mean, that seems fair to me. So I would tell you, I look at the whole big picture, and I think that basically, if it doesn't get better, Pat Narduzzi's been willing to fire guys in the past or move on from guys. If it doesn't get better, I honestly think you have to move on from Frank Cignetti, because to me, now this is 2 years in a row where you've had a transfer quarterback come in who's pretty good, at least allegedly, and you can't figure out how to use him. And you look at what Keaton Slovis is doing at BYU and say, well, why is he working there but didn't work here? That's, a good question. So again, I think Frank's a really good football coach. He's a good man, but he's had a really bad year.
Yeah, if you can let, and that's what happened. They let Mark Whipple walk after winning an ACC title with him after leading one of the best offenses in Pitt history. If you can do that, I think you can move on from this coordinator after 2 years as well. Paul, I'll get you out of here on this. There's been some rumblings about Pat Narduzzi in the Michigan State job. He's been mentioned by some people nationally. I don't know if that's a hire that would fire up Michigan State fans. I've seen some talk about Urban Meyer, so if that's the league that their donors want to play in, I don't know that they'd be satisfied with Pat Narduzzi, but let's just put the question of whether it's likely aside for a second. And do you think Pat Narduzzi has made this a more attractive job, brought stability to Pitt to a level that maybe you can bring in someone where maybe you look back and say, maybe it wasn't a terrible thing that we lost our coach to Michigan State. It's not quite the same thing as losing Todd Graham the way you did, losing Paul Chryst the way you did. That Pitt is no longer like purely just a stepping stone job in the eyes of a lot of people, and that you can have success here and stay here for 10 years in your career. And do you think there's a chance for a productive outcome, even if Pitt does lose Pat Narduzzi?
The biggest difference between Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt job now and before he got there was the Pitt job was a Big East job. And before that, it was an independent job. And they didn't have money. They couldn't hire coaches because they couldn't pay coaches. Colorado proved, doesn't matter what your pedigree is, if you're willing to pay money, you can hire coaches. And so now, it's why I always say Heather Lyke's job as the AD is very mild. You ever want to, if it's a rainy day and you want to have a topic one day, there's a topic I could go on about, is that Heather Lyke is one of the most overrated athletic directors that's ever hit the market. And I could go on and on. I like her. She's done a good job, but all the way over the top praise for her is silly. And I could point out a million reasons why. And one of them is because she's the first athletic director that had money. It's not Big Ten money, obviously, but guess what? When the Pitt was in the Big East, their TV contract and everything else and the bowl money and all, the money that you get from the conference. I mean, right now, I think the Big Ten writes about a $60 million check to each of its schools at the end of the year, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like $60 million. The ACC writes a check for about $40 million. And guess what? The Big East, when Pitt was in the Big East, they would get between $2.8 and $3.5 million a year. That's what they got to spend. That's why they couldn't hire certain coaches. That's why, for instance, when Dave Wannstedt wanted the job, they made him keep Paul Rhodes because Paul Rhodes had a contract that, was a 2-year deal. They didn't want to buy him out because, well, we can't let you hire Matt Canada from the NFL and buy him out. Stuff like that is no longer on the table for Pitt. That's why it's an attractive job. They can go hire somebody now because they can and they're willing to pay, just like Jeff Capel, right? Jeff Capel had other offers to go places. And you know what? He got premium dollar, which 15 years ago, one of the reasons that they went with Jamie is because he was a lot cheaper than some of the other coaches they were talking to. That's a fact, right? That's a fact. And one of the reasons why Jamie every single year did this dance where he let his name be floated out there for every other job, is because that's how he was able to get raises. And that's what he had to do to get raises. That's not on the table anymore. So to me, if Pat Narduzzi were to leave, which I don't think he will, and the other part of it is, I've heard Mark D'Antonio is the guy that is really pushing Narduzzi, the whole Narduzzi thing at Michigan State. And his argument is one of, listen, we've just gone through this whole ugly scandal. We've had a lot of issues at Michigan State the last, you know what I mean? The one thing Narduzzi will do, he'll come in and run a clean program, do things the right way, and, provide stability that we need to get back on our feet. So I get the argument, but my point is I don't know if that's going to excite donors. But either way, if he were to leave, Pitt could actually go hire a coach, because now Pitt has the money to hire a coach. And that's such an important piece of the puzzle.
Important but simple. And sometimes people want to make it more complicated, but I think truer words have never been spoken, Paul. Listen, we're at 52 minutes here. We were interrupted for a decent chunk of time by the emergency broadcast warning, but still been a long talk, a nice chat, Paul. I think we broached some topics that needed to be talked about today. So thanks for stopping by, and I'm looking forward to talking to you after Steelers-Ravens on Sunday.
All right, we'll talk to you then, buddy.
And yes, stay tuned, everyone, for later in the week. More Steelers talk with Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our videos, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Apple Podcast channel for more podcast content. Click below for a special deal of 99 cents for a 3-month subscription to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.